Hello and welcome to Radio Free Nintendo. It is February 20th, 2025. I am James Jones. I'm joined today by Mr. John Lindemann.
It's great to be here, James.
Mr. Guillaume Veillette.
Good evening.
And Mr. Greg Leahy.
Ahoy, everyone.
This is episode 915 of Radio Free Nintendo. And we're going to start with a little bit of news, just a little bit. I didn't tell these guys we're going to start with a little bit of news. We're going to start with a little bit of news. Goal points are gone. Vouchers are not going to work on Switch 2. That's it. That's the news. I think
it's the end of March, right? So close to the end, not exactly the end. So there's a bit of time left, to spend on some games that may. If there's a game that you've seen hit like the same price floor.
March 25th, by the way.
A bunch of there you go, 25th. So a little bit after the Xenoblade Chronicles X comes out, I believe. But yeah, if there's a game that you've seen hit like a price floor a bunch of times and it never seems to get lower, but you haven't pulled the trigger, and it does so again in this interval, now might be the time, because it might be effectively, the cheapest. It'll actually go very slightly up in price when you don't earn the 5% back.
Yeah. Now, if you are thinking about voucher games like Pokemon Z to A or whatever that thing is going to be called, and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, you get the 5% back when you spend the money. So that would be when you buy the vouchers. So
yeah, so again, you could do that, but with the vouchers, it's just a case of like, okay, if you have vouchers, like if you had some idea about buying up a bunch of vouchers and earning the gold points now because you could still spend them on Switch 2 games, that's where obviously you could use the vouchers on Switch 1 games, it would seem, but they won't carry over, presumably because there will be a change in pricing, which is not a shock, I've got to be said. Although, I mean, the voucher program, or it did encompass some variability in pricing as it was, right? Like,
but usually less, not more. Yeah,
the more games on the lesser side, but I think, especially for territories other than America anyway, like Breath of the Wild at launch was more expensive than was ordinary, and then that ended up in the voucher program, and then maybe Tears of the Kingdom as well. I mean, I definitely bought it with a voucher, but I can't remember.
Yeah, Tears of the Kingdom was a $70 game in the US.
But I think the expectation is that you're just going to have a completely different baseline because I mean, it's been 8 years, and it's been 8 years with an uncommon amount of inflation. It must be said. So for the 21st century, anyway. Hardly a surprise that they would be kind of recalibrating things in that way.
And that doesn't mean there won't be a voucher system on Switch 2. It just means these vouchers won't count.
Yeah, they won't carry over. I've got to say, it's a little bit interesting. You might think, in general, that, like, if you're gonna, sort of dish on the bad news in this way, of like, okay, you've got used to getting 5% back on digital purchases, and that's stopping now. You might think you'd like to have, the kind of immediate, like this, if something is going to be taking its place, you'd like to be able to say that straight away to kind of say, okay, well, maybe it isn't as generous, or maybe it works a bit differently with that, but it doesn't seem as bad as just like, this is being taken away, end of story, which it's not necessarily end of story, but when at this particular moment, for the purposes of PR, that's kind of what, some people might take that impression, or or whatever. So I don't know whether it's a case of simply there is nothing, and they're not gonna, that's why they're not talking about it, or it's just like, well, it's kind of bundled up in a bunch of other Switch 2 information, and therefore they don't want to talk about that until that presumably after April 2nd or on April 2nd. But then, you've got to tell people a little bit in advance of when it's going to stop, because you want to give them the chance to maybe, as I already said, like make some of those purchases that they might have been holding off on while the 5% cash back kind of is still in effect. So maybe it's just that creates this weird, like, interregnum of whatever, but it's not ideal.
Well, and I can see also wanting to get out in front of the fact that the vouchers won't transfer, because you don't want people buying up a bunch of vouchers and then finding out later.
That had to be said at the same time, because there was a real risk that people would do that. It's like, well, yeah, like you already mentioned, I can buy the vouchers now and use them later. And it's like, yeah, so that had, the timing of that had to be the way it is. So there's constraints with this kind of stuff, but it's just, as a general matter, I think, if you're going to give people the bad news, you'd want something to go with it to make it go down easier. And they don't have that. And like I said, there's multiple reasons why that could be the case, but that is, a little bit kind of less than ideal, I would have thought. But it's not a shock that they're going to recalibrate the digital sort of incentive, because that's what you got to remember, right? Is like with the gold coins in general, it's like you got essentially like 1% back if you got a physical game card and registered it within the first year or something of it coming out, right?
Yeah, and games that come out before that deadline, you'll still have that opportunity.
Yeah, so there's that, but the fact is that making the digital purchases that much more attractive from a, kind of rewards point perspective was very obviously an attempt to induce people to buy more digital stuff, and of course the vouchers as well. But of course, they've done that for, a number of years now. So I guess going into the new system, you kind of feel like, do we need to offer as much of a kind of wedge there anymore? Because people have gotten used to buying, in part because of that, our games digitally, and just the way that everything's going with online retail, with physical, with actual, storefronts and everything. The last 8 years, obviously, far, far more in the digital direction anyway. So you just think, well, we don't need to have a sharp disparity anymore, to the extent that it is. So it's kind of natural that they'd be recalibrating with the new system, but it just, I guess you got to take the bitter pill sometime in that regard. But, it's not great when you can't immediately say, seemingly, like, just and it's probably not going to be as generous, and it wasn't incredibly generous or anything as it was, but you can't even say what like somewhat less generous thing is going to take its place.
I mean, I would be shocked if it like my lifetime purchases on Switch, 8 years is more than like $100, which isn't a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. Over the period of over 8 years, it's really not a lot of money. Because think about it, and it would be like, okay, you bought a $60 game, you get, what would that be? 1% would be 6 cents, right? So 5% would be 30 cents. Am I doing my math right?
Well, it's 60, and then like $3, right?
$3. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, I don't know why it took too many zeros off. Okay, maybe $150 total over the course of 8 years. It's like, in the grand scheme of things, am I going to feel that? No, not really. And of course, the whole reason they had to do this ass backwards approach of making the games cost essentially 95% of their retail price was because that way they could tell retailers the digital shop costs the same. We're just giving them some credit.
Yeah.
It's not the price. The price is still the price. There's still an opportunity cost in using those gold coins. So like, maybe you use it on a game that's not retail. So it wasn't directly attacking the retail digital price being the same thing. Which there is a certain amount of fun there in that. I can't remember what country it is, but there's a European country that's suing Sony because their digital prices aren't the same as their retail prices. They're higher. But of course, this is the same European court system that said that the manufacturers can't say what the suggested retail price is. They can only give these vague guidelines. It
is galling, though, isn't it? That the idea that the digital price would be higher from the point of view that, it's just like, well, it cuts out an entire production process that costs money.
Right.
And yet it's more expensive. I mean, it's bad enough that it is the same, but as you already mentioned, part of it is managing relations with The retail, you especially for Nintendo, maybe only for Nintendo at this point, to be honest, they have a vital kind of relationship with retailers to maintain, and so you can't just say, "Oh, hey, no, we're just going to cut you out completely." Well, I mean, you could, but it would be very risky and quite possibly self-defeating. To say, "Yeah, we're cutting you out, and we can price the games lower because we're just going to abandon any kind of physical production process, and it's going to save a bunch of money, and we pass some of that on to the consumer maybe to help gin up sales, but more to the point, we'll just take the bigger cut and pad our revenue that way." But except for Nintendo, that's would be extremely risky, and they've not really shown that they feel like it's time to do that yet. But to price it higher, I mean. It's just
but that's again, that goes back to the European rule set of that's the only price Sony's allowed to set is their price. Retailers can do whatever the fuck they want. Like I wouldn't be shocked if there are retailers, particularly in Europe, where you're not allowed to say MSRP is blank, that are willing to loss lead on big games and try to get you some other way. But you might say, well, that'd be really stupid business. What I would point to is look at the state of video game retailers. Obviously, they're already doing stupid business because the state of them is functionally dead. But, if it's like a grocery store that also sells the most popular games that are out right now, they just want you in the store. The margin's not on the video game. The margin's on whatever shit they can sell you while you're there. So, it's a situation where they can't price match because they can't say what the price is, but also the price don't match. So your digital space is not competitive. Now Sony's a little bit more vulnerable because they don't sell cards. They don't sell cards for the code on them.
Right.
Whereas Nintendo and Microsoft do. Sony stopped doing that in it was a big deal. It was 2022. And so in theory, a retailer could charge less for the digital card than the retail price of the game, and that gets you away with it. But there is a certain amount of this ruling, or this lawsuit requires you regard the physical and digital as functionally different products when, especially on the PlayStation and Xbox with those big fucking games, it's just going to install to the hard drive anyway. They're functionally not different.
You can end up with that anyway. Yes,
it's the same product, except now you have a physical CD key to carry around and put in the drive every time you want to play the game. It's a functionally worse experience, and maybe that's why it's cheaper. There you go. I solved the mystery. I solved it. But yeah, this is not a concern for Nintendo. I suspect, and one thing we talked about this with the retail partnerships. I think that's a secondary driver of Nintendo's yes and merch strategy lately, where they're willing to license out merch to lots of retail or merch manufacturers. They're willing to make lots and lots of stuff and have it available. My Target section has more shelf space devoted to large Nintendo plushes. And I'm going to say large. I'm going to define this. About a foot in diameter or more. Big. These are big honking Kirby's. This is life-size Kirby's. They're not just one. There's 7 or 8 different Kirby power-ups.
Was there something like Kirby's actually incredibly tiny in quote-unquote
That's true,
real
you're
life?
Right. You're right. If you compare him to that artist friend he has and regard them with human proportions, that's the size of this Kirby.
You're right. Yes, there we go.
But, they have more shelf space devoted to that than they do to PS5 games. Why? Because I would assume the retail sales of PS5 games aren't very good. And you can't buy a Kirby plush the size of, I don't know, larger than a basketball on the eShop yet. Maybe. I almost feel like this is all part of Nintendo's keep the relationship up strategy, because I've noticed that as time has gone on, more and more of the Nintendo shelf is devoted to merch.
Yeah, I've not been in an actual game shop for quite some time now, but it seems like that was the direction things were going in general for a long time, of just the related stuff rather than the product so much.
It's look at these Funko Pops, So
when I was there at Target last time, the Xbox section in the lockbox under it where they keep consoles and stuff. It had the fridge. It had the Mega Bloks Xbox 360. Have you seen that, John?
No, I'm not.
It's Mega Bloks, and it's just an Xbox 360. So you can build an Xbox 360.
Wow.
And then I assume you can make it overheat. I don't know. And Doritos. That was what was in the case with the Xbox Series X's. Locked up Doritos in prison. I don't. It's so stupid. I almost took a picture and then I was like, oh, I don't post on Twitter anymore. Damn. I assume those Doritos know what they did. But yeah, like that's sort of the state of the retail world. So I get it. Like all of this factors in. I'll be very curious, like what Nintendo does to keep that relationship good for Switch 2, because obviously they need them as part of the distribution plan. I would assume Nintendo's talked about, we've got a plan to prevent scalping, which good luck. I assume some of that they're relying on their retail partners. Be like, hey, we want you to try to prevent multiple buys as best you can. Like limit one purchase per credit card or something like that. But we'll see. Anyway, we're going to move on to some new biz. Oh my God, why do I have 8 unread messages in the Discord? Jeez. Oh, they're all from Seren. Okay. Guillaume, new business, please, while I go read this litany of messages I have been sent.
Sure, yeah. So I finished Final Fantasy 2, and it's weird. I don't know. I don't know what to think about it. It's weird because like I have a tendency to look at it in hindsight, right? Because it looks like basically the kind of a trial before they actually sat down and did a regular Final Fantasy. Like it's like the prototype of so many things that would become Final Fantasy staples, but they're all so undercooked that it kind of looks like they weren't even trying. But of course, that's not. I assume that they were trying to make the best game that they could at the time, and they could not think that, like, oh yeah, we're going to revisit this idea 12 more times. Like,
right.
yeah, I think we're in something here with this evil empire shit. Like that's where this started, and it would be like a big thing of the series, but there's like almost nothing to it. Like everything, the dialogue is very short, very not very punchy, and seems to leave out a lot. Like it's just like the very bare bones, very like these are the I don't know, like the bones of a story, and we refuse to elaborate. And just to give you like, I guess I'm gonna spoil the ending because there's nothing to the ending. Like you already know how it ends. You just don't know that you know. So there is an evil empire. There is the emperor who you kill eventually, but then like his second in command takes over. Have you seen that before? So the second in command is like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be the emperor now. But then you go and you end up recruiting him in a way because the old emperor that you killed comes back from hell, and he's like, well, I'm just coming back from hell now. I've got all the hell's power behind me, and now I'm the boss again, and you can defeat me. And so I do have the exact quotes here because I did take a screenshot. So there, like, there's the big speech before, when you're about to enter the final battle, and he's like, but the hand of man, which deals in false justice and forsaken love, can never hope to defeat the Lord Master of Hell.
Wow.
That's a good point.
So, really goes hard, right? So you fight him. It's a long fight. It's pretty tough. And then you beat him, and of course he's like, oh, you insects managed to kill me again? Like, how is this possible? And so, like, he disappears. And then your guy is like, it's done. Let's get out of here. Like, you're in hell, you're in front of his empty throne in hell, and you're just like, okay, we did the thing. So now let's go back home.
That's me after every carpentry project. All right, good enough.
Yeah, sure.
You gonna put the table saw away? I am not. Why do you ask?
Yeah, let's clock out and let's meet back here on Monday. It's very like the whole tone always made me kind of question, like, is there something more here? Am I just like reading through this dialogue too fast? Like, is there something for me to grab onto? Like, were they trying to say something? And like, I ended up managing to overthink it. I was like, damn, like these despots who act like their rule is inevitable and cannot be challenged end up being completely wrong. As intimidating as they may be. We can take them down.
You got to keep in mind they don't get to read or they don't get to play Final Fantasy 1 and 2 in Final Fantasy 3. If you think about it.
This is the second. I'm still talking about the second.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
They don't get to play Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 2. There you go.
Right. Yeah.
They haven't gotten to learn that the bad guy always loses.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, but in the end, they're just like, yeah, okay. That's done. So anyway, it's I guess it's interesting. Like I'm into the old Final Fantasies now, and yeah, like I was saying that it was a little bit comfort food gaming. I guess that's what it is. Like it's not the game is not terribly Final Fantasy 2, not terribly interesting in and of itself, but I guess I'm glad I played it. Like, it's interesting to see its place in the evolution of the series, but it's not something I would recommend to anyone, ultimately. It's really just if you're, a sicko for old Final Fantasy games. So one thing that I wished I had figured out before I finished the game, I thought, because I had explored the options, that there was no real quality of life improvements outside of, like they redid the graphics, there's an arranged soundtrack, and they did change, like they give you a run button and stuff, like, and I thought like, okay, that's about it for the quality of life improvements in these pixel remasters. And so I had missed that there's an option in the menu called Boost. And this option, so you need to go if you go through to the configuration screen through the start menu, there is no boost option. There's no nothing. All you get is like you can change the graphics, you can change the font style, the soundtrack, etc. You don't get any quality of life improvements. If you start the game and then go into the menu and then go through configuration, all of a sudden there's this boost thing. You go and select it. And you can turn on and off the encounters. You can add a multiplier to the experience points that you get, or in the case of Final Fantasy 2, you get you augment the amount of improvement that you get from fighting, and you can improve also. You can multiply the amount of money that you get. So I wish I had known that, because the last boss of this game was really difficult, and I did have to go back to go grind, to change my strategy completely. If I had known that there was like this multiplier thing, it would have made things a lot easier, a lot faster, and I ended up spending 20 hours playing through this game. Probably could have cut out like a good 2-3 hours if I had known. So it's one of those games where like you're kind of cruising through the game for the most part, and then eventually you reach the last boss and it's just kind of impossible and you do need to grind. And the game doesn't really prepare you for how difficult the fight is going to be. I had to find help online. I did find a Steam conversation where someone was just like, what do I do? I already missed the blood sword. So I went and looked up, what is this blood sword they're talking about? And yeah, like it's this missable event that I had missed a long time ago. So okay, no blood sword. Apparently it makes the last boss a piece of cake, but yeah. Tough shit for me. So the other strategy that I found was that, so the last boss, like he hits hard, and when he chooses to do a physical attack, he just drains your health. And the more health you have, the more he drains. So really, like, when you hit him, you do very little damage, and then he hits you, he heals himself almost completely and drains you completely. And it's like, okay, so now what do I do? Like, I can barely, using the cure spell can barely get me back to top shape. But when I'm using the cure spell, I'm also not doing damage to this boss. And then, like, it's this battle of attrition where you can just keep sipping my health away. And, it's really shitty. So it ended up being the strategy that ended up working was that, I needed to use some old gear that I wasn't really using, like this ancient sword, which has a really crappy hit rate and doesn't really do a lot of damage, but turns out can occasionally cast curse on the enemy. And so it doesn't always work, but eventually, if it does work, you curse the last boss, and then he misses you. Like, curse just lowers his hit rate so much that he doesn't do the whole siphoning health thing anymore. So that worked.
I thought you were going to say that you had to switch your armor back to really crappy armor, so you had less health, so it would take less of a percentage of your health.
Yeah, no, the armor doesn't reduce your health. The system is really weird in this game, but yeah, like that's not how armor works in it. But what is annoying, and again, like that's something that you can boost in the boost menu, but each spell has to be individually grinded. So every time, like your levels, fire or cure or poison, whatever, starts out at level 1. Every time that you use it, it fills up this gauge. Eventually, you're going to level it up. It's going to be fire level 2, 3, 4. It can take forever to get to 10. And then once you get to 10, it can still level up, but like it's ridiculous the amount of times that you need to use it to level it up once more. And the story in the game makes a big deal out of the Ultima spell, which is like, oh, like, watch out, this does a lot of damage. And this NPC, like, he goes on a quest to find it, and, like, he never comes back, and so you have to go and find him, and then you get the spell, and then, it's this big thing. So I thought, like, okay, I better level this up, because it's going to be really helpful. Turns out it's kind of shit. Like, nothing actually really manages to deal damage to this final boss. Yeah, anyway, it was a mess, so I had to grind a lot. I had to find, like, little tricks to finally beat him. And then, yeah, you beat him, and it's like, okay, let's go home. We're done here. Very anticlimactic.
I kind of like that, though. It's like, all right, cool, we finished. We're out. Yeah. Peace.
Sure.
Like, there is a thought of, like, what do you do after you kill the demon lord of the world?
I mean, is there an ending?
Yeah. You go back to the princess that was the head of the rebellion. I don't know where they got that idea.
Well, I've never heard of it used in other games.
No, or movies or anything like that.
Nope.
But yeah, so yeah, you go back and then, like, you say goodbye to all the NPCs who tagged along. And also the second in command to the Emperor was also, like, one of your party's members' brother. So he helps you out for the final battle, and then, like, as you're saying goodbye to everyone, he's you're like, oh, you should stick around, even though you were almost an asshole trying to take the place of the Emperor. He's just like, I don't promise anything, and then like you let him go. And again, like, I was kind of overanalyzing the whole thing, and I wasn't sure where. Like, sometimes when old games, like, their writing is so sparse and kind of, like, doesn't manage to convey tone in a way that
right, it's like super blunt.
Yeah, or, like, you're not even sure where they're going with that, like, was that supposed to be sarcastic? Was that supposed to be, like, like, the sprites don't emote enough for you to be able to tell how you're supposed to read the words on the screen. Mm-hmm. So that there was a little bit of that going on, like, were they saying, like, was this guy being like, I might try again in the future, watch out? Or was he just, actually kind of, my bad, I'm sorry, I'm going away now? Like, I don't know. Anyway, so, sorry, again, too many words for a game that's ultimately probably the worst Final Fantasy that you could go out and play. So after playing that, I needed a break. So I started Final Fantasy 3, and I'm enjoying that a whole lot more.
I needed a break, but didn't take it.
Yeah, well, I was expecting him to say, "Oh yeah, so I started playing Streets of Rage."
There we go.
So Final Fantasy 3, which I guess I don't have that much to say about quite yet because I'm only maybe 5 hours into it. I will say though, I found the DS remake pretty boring. I never got really far into it. I remember it being really punishing and kind of slow. And also, I was never a fan of the art style. It was the 3D stuff. And I just prefer my chunky sprites, I guess. So, yeah, I never really took to Final Fantasy 3 DS. I'm enjoying this version a whole lot more. I don't know if it's easier. It's still very challenging, but I feel like I'm getting fewer party wipes. Yeah, it's just faster to do everything. Again, because you've got the run button, but also you're in and out of fights very quickly. That's not how I remember the DS game being. Yeah, it's got fun little things. It walks back a lot of the stuff that was done in 2. Now you actually level up. You do have a job system, though. It's not as elaborate as it would end up being in 5. Yeah, anyway, so I'm getting a better vibe from it, and you get some fun puzzles. Constantly the game asks you to cast the toad spell in your entire party. Because you need to go inside a tunnel, a puddle of water or something, a flooded tunnel. So, okay, well, we can't go in there until we're all toads, right? And so you cast Toad on your entire party, you turn into frogs, and then you can go, on the other end of this tunnel. Or, there's this gnome village, but you can't go talk to them until you cast Mini on yourself. And so you do that on your entire party, and then you can go in their village. So that's kind of cute, and we'll see. I'm enjoying it a lot more. I guess the last thing that I can talk about very quickly is that I received in the mail a TrimUI brick. So I didn't know about it until I saw a post by David, aka the Thirsty Mage, who used to have his podcast segment on connectivity, NWR's connectivity. Eventually kind of spun off into his own podcast, his own website. So basically the TrimUI is an analog pocket alternative. It doesn't read the actual cartridges. So it's more like a Game Boy shaped emulation machine, but it is a much cheaper emulation machine than the analog is. So that's what drew me to it. I was drawn to the idea of being able to, play ROMs wherever, sure, but not $500 Canadian drawn to the idea. And
Fair.
yeah, the analog pocket has always been kind of an insane amount of money to spend for what it is. For something that ultimately I'm not sure I'm going to use all that much. But the TrimUI is $100 US maybe? I don't know. Actually $100 Canadian might be cheap. It's probably $80 US. And so that's kind of the perfect price. And it seems solid. I don't have any complaints in terms of the hardware. The buttons feel just clicky enough, but not too much. The D-pad is doing its job. The whole thing is much smaller than I thought it would be. I guess I should have read the measurements and actually compared it to something in real life before I ordered it. But ultimately, it's big enough, it's not hurting my hands when I use it. It's got 4 face buttons, 4 shoulder buttons in the back. It's more or less shaped like the original Game Boy. And the whole thing, like it feels like a solid lump of plastic. And the quality of the screen is very impressive. Like that's probably the thing that I like most about it so far. I tried a few Game Boy games, and I just like how the screen makes them pop. Like it's very bright, and the resolution seems very, very high for the size of the screen. So I'm very happy with it. It actually came with it was like loaded with ROMs. Not too many from Nintendo, although if there are a few.
Oh boy.
I guess that Nintendo's lawyers probably scared them, but not enough that they would leave out like F-Zero for Super Famicom, for instance. So that's weird. But like if you go look at the Game Boy ROMs, like you don't find any you don't find like Super Mario, I don't think. No, that's not true. I see Kid Icarus of Myth and Monsters right here. Okay.
That's going to be a problem.
Yeah, so go get your TrimUI mini brick
Go
while
get
you
it
can.
before Nintendo does.
Yeah, but yeah, like it comes loaded already with a bunch of emulators for arcade and Game Boy and Famicom. Like Dreamcast, there are 13 Dreamcast games. I tried for a little bit Dead or Alive 2. And I didn't know what I was doing, but it seemed to run it well. Like it seemed to be running it just fine. You can emulate like N64 games, but the Brick UI doesn't have an analog stick. So I don't know if they're actually playable in this thing. The thing is that TrimUI also has like another model that's more shaped like a PSP or a Vita, and that has 2 analog sticks. So I guess like if that's the what you're looking for, something that can handle like PlayStation and Dreamcast games and N64, maybe that's where you want to go. But like if you want something vaguely Game Boy shaped and play old like Batman Return of the Joker on this thing, I'm really happy. So yeah, something to check out, I guess. I know that, like emulation, like we're not supposed to talk about it or we're not supposed to do it, but like I was literally getting this so that I could, check out some of those games that are never ever going to come out on like the Nintendo service. Although I say that, like, what were the chances that Quest for Camelot was going to be on the service? I swear
Too
that
high.
if I end up playing a whole lot of I don't know, like some terrible license shit on this thing, and it's made available, I'll make an effort to go and buy it. But yeah, it's very, very unlikely that Sunsoft's Batman games are going to be released at some point. If they are, I'll be the first to buy them. But
a lot of those third-party games, they're those obscure ones. But does it let you save game states or do anything like that? Like, because I know I have an analog pocket, and I'm just curious how it.
Yeah, so in theory, but I still need to figure out how these things work. Like to be honest, like I haven't paid attention to emulation for the past 20 years, and so I had to look up what a core was. So that's fun. You can go and change the emulation cores if that's your kind of thing.
Yeah, you can do the same
I
thing
might
on
want to.
Analog Pocket. Yep.
Yeah, and I might want to go into options somewhere and figure out some things because I feel like I did try to save a state, but then I wasn't able. Like when I went back to load. Oh, no, it's there. Okay, so you do have save states. What didn't work was that I tried to favorite some games, and there is a favorite menu somewhere that was still completely empty. So maybe I'm just not looking in the right places. I don't know. But like there are a few things to figure out. David also, like as I said, like I was inspired by his purchase. He sent me a lot of links and documentation for stuff that you can do with this and like the course that you need to change or like the interface or whatever it is. So I might have to dig into that and see if there's something that I want to go change. But like right out of the box, this seems to be doing the job.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's about it for me this week.
Cool. All right. I'm going to go next. So last week I mentioned that I was playing Stories from Seoul, The Gundog, but I also mentioned I couldn't talk about it. Well, embargo's up. I can talk about it. I've beaten it. Review is in editing right now, so I don't even need to consult notes because I've already converted notes into a document. I'm not going to read the review to you, although I guess I could. That would be amenable. But let's just talk about what this thing is. I kind of touched on this last week, but I'm going to go into some detail now. This is a Japanese style adventure game / visual novel. It's right on that line of like, there are purists who would say a visual novel is purely that. You are just reading and clicking through pictures. Then there is people who say like, well, you could start having some adventure game components in there, and it's still a visual novel. It's right at that line. Because the amount of adventure game stuff here is very light. So, I'll rehash a little bit. I know I spoke about this last week. You are a security officer who's been transferred to the Gundog, which is a very small backwater patrol ship. Unimportant would be the word. Your entire crew is basically rejects that have been transferred to this ship, so they're not bothering other people effectively. You, however, were suddenly reassigned here right before this thing went on a mission to investigate a mysterious signal. This is in the first 10 minutes of the game, so whatever. You were transferred here because your girlfriend is the second in command on the ship and pulled some strings to get you on it because she wanted to hang out more. Which is an incredibly irresponsible thing to do as a member of the military, but okay, sure. Might explain why she's on the ship for failures, who can say? But, the crew goes out on this mission to figure out to rendezvous with another ship that's out investigating the signal and to get to the bottom of it. And the net consequence of that is a bunch of pandemonium. So both because of the crew of idiots and because of the source of the signal. Because they aren't going to go out and investigate a signal and then come back because nothing happened. That wouldn't make a very good story. It might be a fairly accurate military story, but it wouldn't make a good story. So let me give you a little bit of rundown here. So gameplay wise, basically you can interact with, you move around the ship. You're pretty much in the ship the whole game. You move around the ship. You can interact with a handful of things in the room. You can look at those same things. If there's another person in the room with you, you can choose to talk to them. And then you have an inventory. And you can iterate through all the things in the room, so there's no hunt and peck. Like, it's literally just right, and it highlights the thing. So you can see when you've looped back around. If you look at everything and use everything, you will advance the story. You probably won't need to. It's usually pretty obvious what you need to do, but you will. Like, it is impossible to get stuck, which is, not always the case for adventure games. I think the longest I got stuck was like 2 minutes. And even then, the game was telling me what I needed to do. I just screwed up. And if you try to use a thing in the room and it expects you to then use an item on that thing, it will highlight the item menu. So all you have to do is press A and it will open. That was where I got stuck. I didn't notice it had highlighted the item menu and pressed up. And so it moved off the item menu. So it'll even tell you when it's time to use an item. Like, you don't have to pull out items and try them on everything. You don't have to do whatever. And it's almost always immediately obvious what item it wants you to do. Beyond that, there are a handful of situations where you meet a character and they'll ask you something. And your answer will affect the story will branch, essentially, as a consequence of your action. There are also some timed-based things where it's like you have to make a decision. There's a timer running, but you have like 5 seconds. It's not like, you got 1 second, go. Like, there's enough time for you to read the whole prompt, figure out what your choices are, think about it, and pick one. That will also affect the branching of the story. And then there's a couple times where it's like, I need to go talk to somebody, and you've got a couple choices, and you decide who you want to go talk to. Now, ultimately, this is not a game that has many endings. It's got one ending. The press material they sent for the game confirms this twice. There's one ending. But the plot details about how you get there can change depending on those decisions you make. So your security officer's job is to keep the ship safe in spite of all of the weird shit going on. The crew is, we'll call them eclectic. Many of them fit stereotypes of space opera anime characters. There are a handful of them who I know exactly what character they are inspired from. I know exactly what series and character you are, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. I felt like they were a little flat. Not Cassie. Cassie's great. I love Cassie. She's the best. But most of the cast is pretty thin, and considering this is a very, very small ship for a handful of failures to be given menial tasks that they can't fuck up, I would have liked to have learned more about my failures. I would have liked to have gotten to see this crew a little bit more detail before shit hits the fan. Because once it hits the fan, there's really not a lot of time to get to know them. Because it's essentially life and death stuff the whole way through at that point. It would have been nice to get to know them a little bit better. Because even some characters who are major catalysts for plot points are pretty thin. Again, except Cassie. Cassie's great. So yeah, like from a storytelling standpoint, it's an anthology. They were very direct about this in the press material that this is an anthology. I didn't put this in the review because I don't know that people would have the context for it, but people listening to the show do. This game does a Xenoblade X specifically. I'm a little upset about it. There's a weird parallel. Like, there's a really... I can't say it without spoiling it, but there's a weird parallel, and I hate it. So I was a little upset about that. I feel like it made the payoff for what is a roughly 6-hour game feel a bit diminished. Because it set up a mystery. It built on that mystery. It had a big dramatic scene. Then it showed a little bit more mystery. And then credits. And it's like, obviously continued in part 2. And I'm like, well, but I want to see part 2 now. Like,
okay, so anthology in that sense. It's not a Ray Bradbury theater where it's like a different story every time.
Well, I mean, it could. Like, there's no reason they have to resolve that mystery explicitly. Like, they could very easily cut to a different place in time and we never see that crew again. But fundamentally, the fate of that crew is immaterial. It's what they uncovered that is the mystery. So, like, whatever happened to them, whatever. But understanding what I saw at the end of the game, you could reveal that with a different story set in the same universe. Because the implication is here is very strong, is that this is not a one-time thing. This is more significant than just what they encountered. So, like, there's some space here where they could literally tell a different story and give you more information about the thing, without going back and consulting with your character on Gundog. Like, that could be totally left to the imagination what happens there. Because fundamentally, like, it would be cool to know what happens to that character, but it's not, like, that character is pretty flat. It's not bothering me to not know. I want to know more about the thing that they ran into. Like, that's much more interesting to me. So figuring out what's going on there is the thing that I want to know. So I'm just going to wait that out. I'm just going to have to wait for the next one of these and hope they sell enough that we get a next one of these and we get to find out what happened. But of course, the appeal of this thing, if you've seen it, is that it's goddamn gorgeous. So they say it's PC 88. Like, it's I think if you've ever seen like actually, you've probably seen it. Famicom Detective Club, same kind of thing, where there's like a square that's as best as they can draw graphics, and then they frame it in a big UX to take up less space and save on processing. with buttons on one side and a big text block on the bottom. Same deal here. And they did talk about how the image part, the part that's like your story video or still images or whatever, is the resolution of the PC-88. I respect the attempt, even though the PC-88 resolution would have been the whole screen. Just saying. But like fundamentally, it's just stunning to look at. Like it's very much in the style of those old PC-88 games. Valis is one of the ones I cite in the review, but there's a bunch like that. Apparently I typed settings with a Z at one point. That's pretty cool of me. If you've ever seen Ys on the PC-88, like that kind of visual style. But the reality of the situation is, this is that, and we've talked about this with retro games in the past, this is not what those games looked like. This is what your brain remembers them looking like. It is much better than those games look. But there are filters you can apply if you want more grunge. If you want it to be more grungy, you can do that. There's even a green screen one. I
set the demo on like black and white or like green and black or something.
Yeah, there's a black and green one, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and then I was surprised when I saw screenshots when the reviews came out. I was like, oh yeah, this game is in color.
Yeah, and it looks really nice. There is one that's closer to the PC-88 where it's kind of grungy but still in color, and then there's the I think they call it Vivid mode. That's the default. That's what I played it in because it's really pretty. Character models are really nice. The settings are good. The mech design is just straight up stolen from Gundam. It just is. They're not Gundams. They're the chaff that Gundams kill, but that makes sense for this crew. I like the character designs. You see them and you instantly know what they are. Every question you could have about that character is answered instantaneously on sight. They have the kindness to telegraph what they are as soon as you see them, which I appreciate. So yeah, like if you go watch that trailer right now, and you're like, damn, this looks cool. Congratulations, this game's for you. If you don't like adventure games, this won't change that. Like, it has some conveniences that make it a little bit easier. It's got a fast travel. There's a menu that always tells you what your objective is. Like, that's cool. That's useful. But fundamentally, this is an old style adventure game. It doesn't attempt to fix the genre. It doesn't attempt to expand the appeal. Like, the fact that it is fairly old school and fairly retro is part of their deliberate design. Like, the ethos of, this is a game for the PC-88 from like 1994. It would break the verisimilitude if they attempted to make a game that wouldn't have played on that system. So they made a game that would have existed on that system. It just looks nicer. But beyond that, like, this game is totally viable for something that might have been on PC-88 or MSX or something in that era of systems. So there's an appeal there just because growing up, you got to see these, like, at least I did. Let me phrase that. Growing up, I got to see these animated images from PC-88 games where, like, I say animated, like a little bit of the image was moving and the rest of it was static. But it didn't look like anything I had ever played in a video game. Even when 3D games had come out, it still had like an art to it that I had never seen in a video game because video game consoles didn't do that. It just wasn't a thing they did. It's not so they couldn't. They just didn't. So like the appeal here, if you see that trailer, is instantaneous. And if it is, then yeah, go pick it up. It's worth playing. Like I said, it's about 6 hours, maybe more, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. Hard to tell. Because Nintendo doesn't have a time tracker. It'd be very helpful if they had a time tracker, Nintendo. Very helpful. The story does an interesting thing where it's not episodic, but it's got multiple rising and falling action moments. So like you could play for a couple hours and get a full arc of the story with like a rising action and a rising action problem resolution, and then pick it up again later and do it again. Like I actually thought I was nearing the end of the game, and everybody was back on the ship, and I'm like, cool, everything's great. And then no, I was not. There was a whole nother round of shit. that popped up afterwards. So that was cool. Yeah, like I said, I enjoyed it. It's good. Like I said, this is the studio's first game. I hope they make the next one relatively quickly because I'd like to know what's going on here. That'd be really cool. Thank you. But yeah, if that's going to bother you a lot, just FYI, it's my biggest knock on the game. So yeah, that's going to do it for me this week. I played it a lot. I basically got 2/3 of it in one sitting because when it takes a while to get started. I mean, a while in the grand scheme of a game that's like 6 hours long. But if you get caught on the hook of one of the rising action moments, like you can very easily find yourself riding it out to the conclusion. So yeah, that will do it for me. I've got more detail in the review. It should be up by the time you hear this article. So, cool. John, you said you were going to pass this week?
Yeah, I'll pass. I've just been, still playing a little bit of No Man's Sky, and a new season started in Diablo 3. So I hadn't played through that on PS5, so I'm playing through that. But that's about it.
Cool. All right, Greg, sorry.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, as expected, I've mostly just been playing Wario Land 4 on the expansion pack this week, which I guess probably the biggest question I had coming out of it was like, why haven't I played this more before? Because I had it when it came out. I played it back then, for sure, pretty thoroughly. That was, in the November of 2001. It's a very, very long time ago. It's funny how it did bring back some memories. I distinctly had this memory associating it with watching the third season of The Sopranos was on British TV at that time. I think it probably would have been quite a bit earlier in 2001. If you were in America back then, there were, pretty sizable lags, with stuff officially coming to British broadcast, but like in particular, a very memorable episode, the Pine Barrens episode, is directed by Steve Buscemi, who would star in the series later, but he hadn't been in it yet. Where Paulie and Christopher are trapped in the titular Pine Barrens after sort of bungling getting rid of a body. It could almost work as like a standalone thing. You wouldn't even have to know that much about the rest of the show to enjoy that one. It's very funny. So yeah, just reminded me of that straight away. And it's like, God, how much have I played this in between then and now? And I did have a look at the 3DS, the Ambassador, they had the Ambassador games on it, and it assuming that's just hasn't been, kind of wiped back or something at some point. Like, I really didn't put a lot of time in with that. Although I don't remember putting a lot of time in with the Ambassador games in general, because it wasn't great.
Well, they didn't have the pause, like the not save state, but you know what I mean. Like you couldn't suspend the gameplay the way that you could with actual virtual console games. No, exactly. That is true, and that limited it a bit. Also, especially on that original hardware, it was like if you let it display of the full screen, it looked very smeared and kind of not very nice. You could, I think, still do the same thing as you could do with DS games in terms of maybe hold one of the start or select buttons and have it boot up, at pixel perfect. But then, especially on that original 3DS, it would have been very small. So not only you couldn't suspend gameplay, but you couldn't just close the clamshell and have it, suspend that way. It was very cumbersome to play those games. It was basically just because it was kind of thinking it was playing like an actual GBA game, wasn't it? It was kind of going into the 3DS part, or exactly. It was going into DS mode and then kind of tricking the DS the mode of the 3DS into thinking it was playing a GBA game back when pre DSi, DS could do that. You didn't have any of those kind of suite of things. Of course, what you did have though, of course, eventually came to Wii U. Virtual Console. I'm quite sure of that, but for whatever reason, I didn't buy that one. I guess part of it is probably that, this was my first Wario Land game, as I mentioned last week. And so, in the time after that, it was more about going back and playing the Wario Land games I hadn't played.
So I think I got a cartridge of Wario Land 3, you know, kind of for Game Boy Color, played that on my GBA at some point. And then like Wario Land 1 and 2, which are still missing from NSO for the time being, kind of weirdly, right? It's only the third one of the Game Boy kind of trilogy that is, and that was available like day one, I want to say, and they haven't you know, kind of backfilled yet. But yeah, I caught up with on 3DS Virtual Console. So yeah, I don't know whether it was just one of these things where it's like, oh, well, that's the one I played, and then I was kind of focused on the rest of the series, and then just never got around to revisiting it until now. But the thing about it is that I mean, I don't remember it being a long game, by any means, but it kind of still took me a little bit by surprise how quick it is. It's really quite short. I mean, I guess it makes sense from the point of view that, you know, this was a really quite an early GBA game, like I said, coming out within the first few months of the system. I mean, obviously it did come out, the system came out earlier in 2001 in Japan than it did anywhere else. I think that was like in February, whereas the rest of us didn't get it until June. But still, like, I think Wario Land came out earlier in Japan as well. So it was still like, just either way, it was just a few months, 6 months or something like that, or fewer, maybe even just 5, you know, into the system. Maybe it was just like, look, we want to have this, of course, you know, R&D 1 at that time, you know, that group, with Sakamoto, you know, Yokoi's former group and all that, like, they had been so responsible for kind of putting, you know, the key software out on Game Boy. That was very much their kind of side of the street. You know, there were examples that weren't them, you know, stuff like Link's Awakening or Mole Mania maybe, but like, you know, most of the time, most of the games you associate with Game Boy, you know, from the Nintendo internal were from them. So it can make sense they've got to have something early and, you know, something shows off the graphics and something that's original, you know, rather than just like Mario 2 again and all that. So it maybe, you know, they didn't have time to make it longer or any of that kind of thing. But the thing about it is it makes it really good for replaying it. It's a very brisk, enjoyable kind of experience, I've got to say. And that really kind of, I guess that's the biggest thing, because the GBA offered, by today's standards, obviously still pitifully low resolution, but the fact that it did offer a bump in resolution compared with the original Game Boy and GBC, what they could expand the playfield a little bit. Obviously, you know, Wario was always like a really big sprite relative to the playfield on Game Boy, and it kind of had to be if it was going to be, you know, have the detail to kind of characterize Wario and you know, have the personality that they wanted to have. But you know, they designed everything very much around that. You know, it was a slower pace game. It wasn't trying to be, you know, like Super Mario Land 2 was very much trying to be like a junior Super Mario World, for instance. Like they was basically saying, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing more of our own thing that's more custom for, you know, the Game Boy. But, you know, all that being said, it was kind of cramped, and now you kind of expand it out a little bit, and with the extra button now, like instead of just the kind of short range charge, Wario can sprint. It makes everything is it can be a bit more brisk. It almost feels like this is a bit of an anachronism, because these sorts of games very much were not in the arcades, even by 2001. But it almost feels like somebody made an arcade adaptation of Wario Land. Like it's faster, it's snappier, it's prettier, it's more impressive. Like, but with like the whole, obviously Wario Land 2 and 3, took us to the place of Wario can't die anymore, and the whole, like, he gets transformed by being attacked into various forms. Like, that's still there, but it feels kind of vestigial, presumably because, again, it just wouldn't, like, that emphasis, you know, didn't fit as well anymore with like this kind of faster kind of gameplay. So you'll still get some moments where there's like some puzzles for like finding extra stuff, or in some cases stuff that isn't extra. We'll kind of get to that blurriness about that in a moment, but like that stuff is still there, but it's definitely, I mean, it's been a while since I played like Wario Land 2 at this point, because even though that was on Virtual Console, that's got to be 10 odd years ago. But definitely, like, it feels like there was more of an emphasis on that. All that stuff there, and obviously again, like the way it ends up with the bosses, where like, well, you can't die, but they can just kind of force you to restart the fight by taking any kind of a hit. So how different is it, all that? Here, you have a health meter, you can die fighting a boss, and the boss is weirdly granular health for anything Nintendo. I mean, I get, maybe we can overstate the whole rule of 3 thing, where it's just like, well, you bop it 3 times and then it dies. It's not like every single Nintendo thing ever abides by that, but like these bosses have a very transparent kind of health bar, and actually take quite a lot of hits to beat, and you're on a timer, and it's the one time that the timer is actually truly hard constraint. So, that it's kind of quite different from the bosses, that you would have been fighting in the Wario Land 2, for instance, at that point. So, yeah, all of this kind of, it ends up creating something that, to me anyway, at least, again, not quite a side-by-side comparison, because it's been a little while since I played some of those previous Wario Land games at this point, but it definitely got this kind of more arcadey feel, and in some ways, maybe it could come off feeling a bit less substantial. I mean, certainly, and again, this is going back a long time, but Wario Land Shake It takes a lot from this game, but I think that probably it must feel more substantial because it's probably trying to be live up to more of those kind of the side scrollers of that period in the kind of end of the aughts, where you try and sort of expand the life of it with they had like missions in that. They're almost like achievements and stuff, and they did reuse some of the level themes over again, so it kind of felt like they were trying to drag the content a little further anyway in that case. Here it's just like, it's very compact, and admittedly, like, yeah, you could theoretically run into some roadblocks from the point of view of like you first of all, it technically is possible to like have a run into the level and then come back and like not have the key that actually lets you go to the next level in that world. But I mean, you'd have to struggle to do that, because the key is usually like really, really obvious. You almost can't miss it. But there's the odd case where it's like a little bit off to the side, or maybe you could like dash past something, or like, so it's theoretically possible. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is there's 4 parts of a diamond in each level, which you don't need them to progress to the next part in that particular world, but you do need them all to actually fight the boss of that world, and then that's what you need to actually unlock the end game. So it's essentially is necessary to get those 4 things, but I guess you don't necessarily have to get them all at once. You can sort of bank these things, on a run through a level, and then maybe come back. But yeah, what I was going to say in terms of there's this sort of blurriness between what isn't kind of necessarily what is that you when you first boot up the game, you can choose normal or hard, which, kind of a little bit unusual. A lot of the time you might think if you've got 2 difficulties at start, it might be like easy and normal, and that might be more apt, because if you pick normal, like, there's a lot of things that seem super generous about the game. Like, a lot of those locations of the chests that have the diamond pieces that you'll need, in some levels, it's like they're just giving them to you. You know what I mean? Like, they're just there on the regular path. Like, you are not really having to go particularly off the beaten path at all to find them. And then other things, like, for instance, the whole aspect of you find a switch that you have to hit to sort of activate the exit of the level, which was also where you came in. And then you've got to dash there before the timer runs out. Although it's not a hard time. All that happens once you hit 0 is your score starts dropping, the money you've accumulated. So it's like you're not dead straight away like you are in a boss. It's just like the money starts dropping. So it's kind of like, you play on the normal setting and you've got plenty of time, in virtually all the levels, when you hit that switch to still find stuff, to, if you mess something up, you've got plenty of time to just, let's just pick myself up and go again. Everything feels really accommodating, and I ripped through it so fast, just like virtually. And again, bear in mind, not having played it in any depth for 20 odd years, I've got no real working memory of the game. You might remember like general things like the premise of a level, or,
right,
like themes and, maybe what bosses look like and stuff, but nothing about like, oh yeah, that's where you find this, or, this is how you beat that boss. Like, no, my memory's not that good. No way. So like, it's just really simple. And I guess the other thing there's a few things you could say. First of all, having played a bunch of Wario Land games, and I would also lump in like Game Boy Metroids in, there's just, you just kind of, the games they're going to play with you a little bit. You know what I mean? Like you kind of, you can guess where something's going to be hidden, because there's, just that design sensibility that this group of developers had. I've played a lot more of those games now than I had back then. Obviously, some of them didn't exist, like Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission. At this point, I mean, with this Wario sprinting thing, there's definitely kind of some overlap with Shine Spark type stuff and Speed Boost stuff in the Metroid games on GBA. And, like I said, you just kind of, I guess, just with that intuitive sort of thing you build up, and the fact that it's just really, a lot of it's pretty simply laid out. Like I went through that first run very fast, and then it was kind of like, well, yeah, that was really fun, but it didn't last very long. Let's think about, kind of seeing what else is there to do. Now, there is, and they play this down. They don't really emphasize this at all. And this, if I had probably one criticism about the game, it's kind of like a minor one, but I would say this might be one of the sort of more significant, is that like you get graded on a score for how much money you bring back, right? Makes sense. It's a very Wario thing to do, but they don't make a big deal of it, and it doesn't unlock anything really. Like if you get a gold crown of having brought back, enough cash on each level, it unlocks a karaoke mode for a song in the sound test.
What?
Sure. That's all they do with it. And it's like you could, it's like they do have a sort of typical for this team, a sort of a Metroidy thing going on with the ending, where it's like basically you get a better ending, like for doing stuff quicker, but that's all about beating the bosses. It's like, okay, if you beat each of the individual bosses quick enough to get maximum treasure chests, and then you beat the final boss quick enough to keep, which sort of pulls all of that treasure into one big pot, and you have to beat that quick enough, then you get like the best ending. But it's like, that's, I don't know, like the bosses, I mean, they look cool, they're great, sort of this detailed pixel art. It's very Wario, that kind of almost like Garbage Pail Kids, like bizarro, disgusting kind of thing going on. Like they can take it to a much higher level than they could on GBC, with the extra detail and stuff. Like they look, but I wouldn't say gameplay wise they're like a huge highlight of the game. So it just kind of weird that that's what gets you the highest, the best like ending, or that almost feels like the ultimate goal to shoot for. Whereas like the ability for, in terms of how much money you bring back is much more testing of like, are you, defeating the enemies that you find and getting maximum coins from them? Are you finding not just the treasure chests that have the diamond pieces in that also have money, but are you finding all these additional like bonus diamonds, like those weird, like there's purple pipes that you go into, and it's just like, it can really very optional. some sort of little puzzle. It's almost like a shrine, in Zelda or something, like it's this weird thing that's just outside of the rest of the level. It doesn't really fit in. It's just like a little place where you can earn an extra diamond for extra cash, and that's it. It's very explicit that it's not good. It will never be a diamond piece or anything. That part is very explicit. So it's like, how much money you bring back is a good indicator of your performance in the level on a bunch of different sort of metrics, if you like, in terms of avoiding damage, beating enemies, finding secret stuff, getting back in time. And they use it for almost nothing. It's there. You can shoot for it as a goal, but it is not like an incentive to unlock some sort of secret level or even the best ending. It's just there and you get the karaoke thing. At least it acknowledges that you've done it, I guess, with the karaoke thing. But I guess it's also very authentically like Wario and dopey for that to be true. But it still kind of feels like, it's hard to imagine that would be true if you were doing that now. I feel like there's been more attention paid in side scrollers, hence where it's like you want to kind of have some sort of incentive structure with stuff like that. You could think of some of the stuff, not just like Good Feel doing Wario Land 4, but Wario Land Shake It, I should say, but also Kirby's Epic Yarn. Like that had gold medals and all that kind of stuff, didn't it? To track your performance. And I think it was much more, makes a much bigger deal of it, than it does here. So that's a little bit strange, but, you can also pick hard. And what that does is not only has a lot more like enemies and stuff, but it makes the time that you have when you're coming back, from having hit the switch quite a lot tighter. But it also remixes what places, like what sort of hidden bits count as like a treasure chest and which are just like big diamonds. Like it actually changes what are the things you kind of need to find, essentially. And that was kind of interesting to me because like it kind of felt like, I almost wish I hadn't played as much of the game on normal as I did. Because at that point, I'd kind of found some secret places in levels trying to get a gold crown in a stage that, where you get there and it's like, oh, this is it. This is all there is. Like, there's just like a diamond or like, that seemed like quite an advanced kind of puzzle or, something cleverly hidden. And then, of course, what you discover is in hard, that's where the treasure chest for the actual diamond piece that you actually need has been switched to. So, it's kind of, I kind of feel like maybe it works well if you play normal just to see the levels the first time and race to the credits, and then you could go straight to hard. But there are things about hard that I don't like as much because it is just kind of like, okay, the time limits for the bosses get even tighter, which doesn't really make them more fun. You just get more nuisance enemies, which, again, I guess it's a little bit more of a test, but I don't feel like that's what this game is about. And so they are just more annoying, at that point. Like, so the sort of, the perfect experience of Wario Land is somewhere between the two for me of like, you could dial, some of these kind of, enemy things back, but have the more advanced sort of difficult locations for the diamond pieces and stuff that you're actually trying to find. Because that's really what's the most interesting aspect of it. But, that's that kind of, and just, I guess for the sake of design clarity, maybe, you know what I mean? Like having a design so it's like, okay, we've got these different levels of difficulty and, we'll switch up what locations function as what based on what the difficulties people pick. It just feels like maybe, it ends up being a bit less clear. Like, so you will find stuff on a playthrough where it's just this sort of underwhelming sensation of like, I thought I did something clever and I get almost nothing for it. And it's like, well, you kind of did, but you were just kind of outpacing the, it's really just for that added difficulty level. And in fact, I think there is an unlockable one that's like super hard, But I don't know exactly what... I've beaten it on hard. I don't know what you have to do beyond that, but there's something. And you get an even more advanced one where maybe, you know, there's even more, like, nooks and crannies that you'd have to find that you wouldn't necessarily have seen in the preceding difficulties. But overall, just really, really fun to revisit this after such a long time. And it is a very sort of snappy, you know, not that those other Wario Land games are not like particularly that long, you know, but I guess because they're kind of intrinsically a little bit slower paced, more emphasizing the transformation mechanics and stuff, some of it might just be psychological, like this feels like it goes faster, but, you know, these, I guess, you know, back in those days, I mean, it reviewed really well, as I recall, Wario Land 4, didn't it? It was always so well regarded to some extent because it was like an original game, you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of stuff on GBA that was just like, oh, well, this is like a Super Nintendo game ported down or a NES game ported up or, you know, whatever you want to say, but this felt like an honest to goodness GBA game and it did get a lot of good reviews, but I guess maybe some people might have knocked it for length, but now with the, you know, being on a subscription service and stuff like that, to be honest, it might just be a plus. I'm just like, yeah, you know, you can play this thing, you can get quite a lot out of it and be done with it really fast, but if you want to stick around, it does have more difficulty settings. It does have, you know, more like goals to find. It'd just be kind of nice if, you know, it had more like more substantial kind of reasons to reach these milestones than just like your own motivation. But I mean, in the end, I mean, that is actually what matters. And I guess the last thing to say about it is just that it does have these mini games in it, which, you know, didn't know at the time were this harbinger of, you know, what they were going to do with Wario in the future and essentially ends up kind of, for the most part, killing this series, basically.
Right.
Although, yeah, we do have Shake It some years later. It's not, you know, made by the R&D one team or its, you know, successors of SPD or whatever it ended up being called later. But, you know, like, they moved on to WarioWare, you know, you can see, if you play this, you hear the soundtrack, the sound design, it has a lot of that personality is there, but then also specifically these mini games, which like you have to like, all the money you bring back goes into a big pot, which you can then spend on mini games, which if you sort of do well at the mini games, it gives you a different kind of currency, which you can spend on items to kill the bosses faster, which it just feels like a weird, again, I don't think the incentive structures really work. It's a not a big deal, but it's like these are the one criticism. Like these don't really hang together to me. These don't make me want to play these mini games, and they're just not that like it without that WarioWare quick hitting structure. The simplicity of them doesn't really work the same way. I mean, yeah, you can play WarioWare games on sort of a loop for a high score, but that's like for really dedicated WarioWare players that are going to go to an individual game and set a high score. And that's kind of what you're dealing with here. You've just got like the sort of the baseball one and the one where you jump over kind of obstacles on a auto-scrolling thing on a tire, and then one where you have to like pick out the right face kind of facial features on somebody in a barbershop chair. Like there's not a lot to them, but I guess it's just like they had this idea and they didn't really know what to do with it yet, and this was the what they came up with. But then, of course, you know, with the benefit of hindsight, we know they would come up with a structure that they could actually sort of make these things work in, and it would, you know, go on to completely kind of define Wario stuff for the next, you know, couple of decades. So, you know, there's a historical interest in there too. But yeah, for goodness, if you've not played Wario Land 4 for a long time, I'd say, yeah, it's well worth revisiting it because it's just got so much stuff that, you know, I really like about that era in terms of the pixel art, the snappiness of the play, the personality. It's all there.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to do listener mail probably. So stay tuned for that. We we are back. And I want to start with a little bit of business. Not new business. That was the last segment. Regular business. Podcast. For the podcast. So, you have been sending us retroactive suggestions. And we had kind of primed the pump here saying, like, we'll accept games on Switch from the first year of the Switch's lifespan. Not the first 12 months. The first calendar year, 2017, of the Switch's lifespan. We wanted the games to be relatively brief. Like, they don't have to be like a 2-hour game, but we didn't want like a big long game. We want it to be a reasonable amount of time. It's a good time for me to start getting hiccups right as I'm doing the intro to this segment. That's awesome. We've gotten a bunch of suggestions. There's definitely been some overlap. Have I read them all? No. Have I read enough to know there's some overlap? Yes. It's fine. It's fine. Everything's great. And appreciate that. We're gonna pull up on it next week and go through the recommendations. So, get them in before Thursday the 27th. That would be ideal. And then we will include them for consideration on our side. I don't think we're going to do the whole thing where we record an episode that's just us deciding on it. Unless we feel like there's something interesting to do there. We might not decide on it next week. We may just use next week to kind of like, okay, here's the themes. Why don't we think about it and then come back together? But we're close. So we're going to do this one probably in March, I guess. I don't know. I haven't figured it all out in my head. Before the Switch 2 blowout. So somewhere in there. Hopefully before Xenoblade X comes out, because that could be its own retroactive, I guess. Fuck. I didn't even think about that until just now. Could Xenoblade X be our retroactive? I mean, there's kind of already an episode where we recorded our extended...
Yeah, I don't know how different... Obviously, there will be differences with this version and whatnot, but it doesn't quite fit the criteria we've laid out currently in terms of being quick.
At all. Or 2017 or Switch. So, none of the above. But, that's okay. It's okay. I don't think we need to do another spoiler cast for that game, but I am interested after I finish it this time to go listen to the last one and see what I see. But, yeah, previews are coming out for that, so that's cool. Excited for that. But, you can send your suggestions to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. That's also where you can send your listener mail questions. These are things that you ask us and then we answer them. That's how questions work. Question and answer. It's a 2-part thing. John, would you read the first question? It is in the chat.
Certainly. Lord Not writes, Dear RFN crew, the discussion of Super Mario Bros. 35 in episode 913 reminded me of how that game got me through the pandemic even more than Animal Crossing did. And that, while there may be some less than kosher means to continue to play the game, I will probably never have that experience of regularly having 34 other players to test my skills against again. My question is, what gaming experience lost to time do you find yourself missing the most? Games whose online servers have long ago shut down, or perhaps those where the experience has fundamentally changed over time, i.e. GTA Online in the first few years compared to now? Do any of you miss Dr. Goomba Tower as much as Dr. Goomba Tower surely misses you? Thank you all for your due diligence in not calling the Switch 2 the Switch 2 until Nintendo officially named the Switch 2 the Switch 2.
You're welcome. Names are important. So that's. I mean, they didn't call it the Switch 2. Why should we call it Switch 2? They called it the successor to Switch. Now they did. Now we can.
My disappointment there is that they didn't specify that it had to be in all caps. So
I think it should be in alternating case.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, I just want everybody to know that when I say the word GameCube, it's in all caps.
Oh, is it all caps? I was going to say, is it intercapped or is it all caps?
No, it's all caps.
Is it one word or two, John?
God, I don't remember. I don't remember. I thought it was one word. Right. It's always one word, isn't it?
It's always one word.
Yeah. It's I'm listing you things that are on the NWR style guide.
Dare you even suggest it would be two?
I mean, if I remember correctly,
I want to say the style guide says explicitly it is one word with G capitalized, C not.
I think Nintendo wanted it to always be called Nintendo GameCube, all caps.
Sure.
If I remember correctly, that was actually in their style guide.
I believe I absolutely believe that. And I absolutely believe they can get bent. So, multiple things can be true. Gaming experiences that are gone that are never coming back, essentially.
Yeah, sadly, this is becoming more and more of an issue.
Yeah. I mean, so it's funny. It's funny you say that though, because in some cases, these highly transformed games are coming back. Obviously, Fortnite ran a Super Bowl ad about Fortnite coming back to what Fortnite used to be, which is bizarre. Classic WoW is slowly gaining expansion packs from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What was the other one? Isn't basically Overwatch 2 getting a bunch of stuff to make it more like Overwatch 1?
I think so, yeah.
So, like, there is this weird turning my service game that I evolved into one thing back into the thing it used to be as a side mode. But I guess it's like a nostalgia play. Like, hey, it's probably a way to drum up activity on your game, people who have gone idle on it for an extended period of time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's weird. We're getting to the point now where video games in an advanced state where you have these online worlds, persistent worlds, MMOs and stuff like that. It's getting to the point where those games have been around long enough that people are actually you're having generations of people play those games because, World of Warcraft, for example, that game has been around since 2004. So it has been around for a full generation of people. Like,
yes.
There have been people that started playing World of Warcraft, have had children, and now their children are playing World of Warcraft. So
what a failure of parenting.
I don't know. I like World of Warcraft. It's a great game.
No, but I played World of Warcraft in 2004, and I let Mike, no, don't.
Yeah.
You know where this goes? Be careful.
Yeah. But,
I mean, Overwatch is 2016. Like, it's getting up there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, when was Fortnite was in that space too? It's pretty old.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like,
also having to refresh these games. You bring up a great point. Having to refresh these games, and in doing so, having to tapping into that nostalgia. Because players that were there since day one are like, man, I miss the good old days. Back when, I don't know, for World of Warcraft, it would be, man, I miss Baron's chat. Because that was always where, everybody was just talking completely reckless in chat and would say whatever, in the Barons outside of, Orgrimmar or whatever.
I do like that the expansion of that was when this game was good, always basically just slides one expansion.
Yeah. Like any changes that have been made, makes people wistful, even though, I mean, it's much like any other game where what you loved in like 2002, you play that in 2025 and you're like, this really isn't as fun as I thought it used to be. But you still have that nostalgia that kind of pulls you back to it.
Right. So. You were in a different spot of your life, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're not in the same spot you were in your life in 2002.
Yeah.
I mean, unless maybe your 2002 was fucking sick. I don't know. I can't judge. But yeah, I get it. There is so like the thing with these digital products is they could come back.
Yeah.
They just don't. Like they, broadly speaking, they just don't. All those ones we mentioned have a financial incentive for bringing back the way it used to be. Either they sell subscriptions or they sell unlockables or stuff that you can get for money. Like they're gas, essentially. They're gas games.
Mm-hmm.
They're gas games that rely on you paying them money in some kind of pattern. They're not just like you buy it one time, you're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Even actually, I can give you an example. Splatoon. So Splatoon 3, was it 3 that brought back Splatoon 1's overworld and some of the stages if you bought the DLC?
I think I think it might have been Splatoon 1 and 2 overall. Like hubs were
hubs,
cosmetic things that you could have if you bought basically before the actual content of the DLC was ready. You could have this cosmetic stuff that was throwbacks to the previous games. I forget exactly what the specifics were, but it was generally that. And
I want to say they also rescued a bunch of stages.
They were adding stages progressively, as after the game came out. But I mean, I think for me, if we're talking about, this is something that you can't just bring back so easily as, kind of a recycled content or something. A lot of the time that with these online kind of leverage games, it is, how vibrant the kind of player base is and the kinds of games you get. And, you definitely get that sort of thing of like when a game is new, lots of people are playing it and you've got maybe, a nice kind of spread of like skill levels and, you can kind of fit somewhere in the middle of that. And then if you keep playing it, more and more people drop out and then you're just left with the people who are actually really, kind of active and very good at the game. And it's not that much fun anymore. And you can't get that back, basically. I mean, the nearest thing you could get back, it would be, say, for instance, if that happens with Splatoon 2, and then it's when Splatoon 3 comes out, you get a little bit of that back, right? Because it's like, okay, people buy the new game and, you've got that more kind of mix again of, skill levels and, all that. And it lasts for a certain length of time and then that passes. So that kind of thing is definitely, sort of, there's always going to be an ephemeral kind of aspect to that. It's just a particular moment of time, that, isn't going to last. And sometimes it's very quick. I've talked about this example in the past, like where the Mario Strikers on Wii online was quite fun for a relatively brief period until people found the exploits, and then it fucking sucked because the only people that were left were just the people that wanted to ruthlessly, use those exploits against other players, which surely helped drive a lot of the people that were playing the game before away. And it couldn't be patched because Wii. So, that was really quick, compared to even, some of the other games we could talk about in the future.
As somebody who doesn't play a lot of online games in general, I have to go back pretty far. But I remember the original StarCraft, the StarCraft 1. There was a fairly vibrant community on fucking MIRC. Well, it was IRC, but I was using MIRC as a client. That just made absolute dumb bullshit levels in the level maker for multiplayer. And then you could go online and play them, arrange to play them. Cause it was hard to find stuff in there cause everybody was making stages. Which isn't real, it's stage makers isn't really a big thing either. But the stages the levels were meant to be stupid and silly and ridiculous. And so you would end up with 4 people from this MIRC chat and just right out of the gate, something incredibly dumb happened and they'd had triggered effects and all this. Nobody was there to play a good game. Everybody was there to see what dumb bullshit people could pull. And that kind of community element, became sort of not self-fulfilling. Essentially just kept amping itself up. Everybody had to everybody had to, somebody would find a way to break the thing and make it do something it wasn't meant to do. And then everybody spent the next 2 weeks trying to one, figure out how they did it, or if they didn't just tell us in the chat. And then 2, use it for the maximum amount of stupidity. And there were stages that I'm pretty sure got axed by Blizzard. That people made. I was like, no, you can't do that. That's not okay. And there was always a sense of any stage I go into, I might be exposed to the most vile possible thing in the StarCraft tile set. I might encounter something truly horrible and horrific, not just oh, this is a bad stage, but offensive and gross. And it feels like a lot of that stuff doesn't exist anymore. Like, you might say, like, well, all that stuff being gone is a net positive. But, like, okay, I got through it. Like, there's a certain amount of, like, that stuff's been sort of ironed out of those spaces. And so now it's either it's not like just crass. It's got to be something else. It's got to be good. But, like, I don't think that kind of stuff really exists the same way of, like, we have an IRC channel with like 1,000 people in it who do nothing but make the stupidest fucking stage they can come up with. And then everybody goes and plays it. And it's kind of the same with like message boards, where effectively video game message boards don't really exist anymore with one significant exception, and it sucks. Which, it sucks. It does. Sorry. It just does. Like, it's got people on it who are fine, but overall it's not a great experience, and ultimately, like, that's just kind of where the internet is right now. Everything feels very ephemeral. And so community stuff doesn't really hold the same kind of lasting. Like, it goes away.
Well, a lot of it is just people sitting there looking for confrontation. So,
oh yeah, there's that too. But like,
yeah.
even with like Discord, technically speaking, it's all still there, but it's not meant to be viewed outside roughly when it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like a message board, the people were posting threads on, there was a message board tied to that IRC where they were just posting threads of, I made this stage, I want to make this dumb thing happen. Does anybody know how I can make it happen? And they would go and plan it out, and you'd sit there go like, oh, I need to see that stage when it's done. It was like, there was a racing game in there. Somebody managed to turn StarCraft into a kart racing game where you controlled, the probes, the Protoss probes, and basically hitting certain checkpoints first got you advantages, and eventually the person who got to the end first won. I don't even know how they did it. It's insane, but it was stupid and hilarious, and I enjoyed it. So I feel like Mario Maker gave us a brief glimpse into that.
Oh, definitely. That was going to be my answer for this, really. I think that period was pretty unique, right. and even though, obviously now we could say, oh, well, they shut off the Wii U online completely or whatever, but the moment passed a long time before that,
did.
Because, there's just that instant kind of impact of people buying the game, all different kinds of people, trying to make levels or, playing the levels, all that kind of stuff. I mean, especially considering it was constrained by how, not popular the Wii U was. Like, it seemed to do relatively well in terms of, like, actually radiating out, like, awareness, I guess because it was so shareable, of just like, hey, look at this dumb thing that, somebody made or that just happened within a level that was, like, relatively conventional, but, like, just something unexpected. But, the fact that everybody, felt like were trying their hand at making levels and the diversity of things they could do, and that feedback between, kind of seeing what other people have done and then kind of trying to sort of incorporate some idea from there into what you're doing with a level and so forth. It definitely, kind of lasted for a while, and there was a novelty to it. And then, at a certain point it kind of dies down, and it's going to be people playing the Wii U Mario Maker all the way to the end, wasn't it? To like beat every single level that got uploaded to the service, even some of the ones that were effectively in bad faith because it used some sort of exploit that it should have been almost impossible to beat, which obviously was not the idea. You had to beat every level you made to upload it, but some people had exploits, but even those were done at the end, so people kept playing it all the way to the end. But in terms of that more kind of like this sort of community sized like thing, it passed a lot sooner than that, and it wasn't that easy to recapture because I don't know that it really happened with Mario Maker 2 the same way. I think the fact that it was the novelty couldn't be replicated, but also maybe just the interface for making levels wasn't as welcoming, and it just didn't quite happen, did it?
It didn't have the zeitgeist moment, and like a big part of Mario Maker was shit like what Giant Bomb was doing at the time, where they were literally trying to make stages they themselves could not beat. Or just fucking or just going in there and going, give me 10 random stages. Like that, they had a certain cachet that they don't really have at this point. But like people, creators, not just them, like creators in general going out there, and that was good for content. Like, I feel like you're right. The creation stuff wasn't as good in 2. I feel like 2 also maybe made things a little bit more complicated. But I think
that's
also,
that you could make some really, I mean, in terms of, I played a lot of levels with Mario Maker 2, but I didn't really make, I mean, some of it's just because I kind of create, again, the novelty of creating levels. I had that in Mario Maker 1 with easier kind of tools, with the gamepad, or more inviting kind of tools with the gamepad. And so, like, I don't know, I didn't really feel compelled to try making levels myself, but the stuff I played from other people, I mean, it's because it had got more things integrated, the way you could create actual consistent worlds, essentially like entire campaigns, of Mario games. Like, it's really impressive. Like, I had a lot of fun playing the game, but yeah, in terms of recreating that sort of more community moment, it didn't seem like it could do it. And even though it was a much more popular system, and it must have sold many more units.
I would guess that maybe it's not even though, maybe it's because it was a much more popular, because there was more stuff available to eat into its attention.
Kind of rally around it a little bit, to some extent, because that's what was there, and it was different, and it was cool, and it was using features specific to that system.
Yes.
It had a lot of different things coming together in that way. But like you said, it did seem to ripple out of like just the Nintendo enthusiast circles a little bit. You kind of wonder if you could have had all those things happening in a similar way, but just on a more popular system, how kind of, big that those ripples could have got. But, like I said, a few years later on Switch, it isn't the same. And that just is another reminder of the fact that some of these things, even if you do callbacks or, kind of attempt to say, let's remember the good old days and let's try big some stuff back. It's kind of easier said than done. A lot of the times it was something that was specific to that moment, and then it's gone. That's just the nature of it.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say I miss more of sort of the real life experiences. Like, I miss being able to go into an arcade, and like when arcades were big, that was really, really fun to go into these dimly lit, dingy arcades, but just find like this new game that you had never seen before, and just trying it out, throwing a quarter in and giving it a shot. I miss, when E3 used to be fun and cool and relevant, before it just self-destructed and then just became a sad shell of its former self. When everybody
Enough
that you
with
knew,
the commentary.
I mean, when you used to be able to go to E3 and pretty much everybody that you had interacted with online for like the last year was there, and you could hang out and just play games and do dumb stuff and play stupid games, play 3DO games, like what James and I used to do. Like, that was really fun.
That was at PAX. But
at PAX, yeah, but those kinds of experiences, PAX is still around, but
yeah,
none of that stuff is really the same anymore. I mean, COVID really killed a lot of that stuff.
It did a lot of damage. But
it did a lot of damage, yeah.
E3 also just didn't feel relevant the same way.
No.
Like there is a like even it's I don't know, like what's the best word for it? Pale imitation of the Summer Games Fest.
Yeah.
TM, Moneybags, whatever. It feels inorganic. It feels like, not that E3 was organic, but it feels,
well, I know what you mean, but I guess there's a lot of it at the E3. I don't know about organic, but it felt kind of accidental, right? It's like, it was a trade show. That's what it was. Right. It was like, people are going to come from, the retailers and all that, and you're going to show them the products that you want them to put in their stores, in the coming months. And that's what it was in the kind of in the mid 90s, and then it just kind of and obviously press as well, and so
Right.
but much more limited, and it just kind of accidentally snowballed into this other thing where it became this kind of almost like the Super Bowl or something for video games in the middle of the year. Like it just that was kind of by accident, and I guess to some extent that's why it was all the more inevitable that wasn't going to last. Like that eventually these sorts of functions that were not core to what E3 was in the first place were not going to be convenient to kind of be served there anymore. You were going to do it a different way, a more direct way. So literally with Nintendo making these videos that are just going to go straight to consumers. Once you got into the social media age, it was probably just a matter of time. I'm sure there's things the ESA could have done better, to navigate the waters or whatever. Yeah. But like you said, there was this kind of feeling of that just it kind of lucked into turning into what it was. And then by the same token, it kind of had to end the same way.
Yeah. And I think when I say authentic with Summer Games Fest feels like paid shills standing outside telling you how cool this thing is, because it's all being funneled through one person's perspective, whereas E3 was chaos, and that was part of what made it feel real.
Yeah,
because it was every game company screaming at the same time to get your attention. Whereas
and you always felt like you were almost kind of sneaking backstage at a concert. There was always that sort of, like that kind of like, even though you were kind of in the press, you probably still weren't really supposed to be there. Like it was okay that you were there, but it wasn't really meant for you.
It felt like you were seeing something that is unique and weird, and like you were seeing things in a state they're not meant to be, or you were running into people who it's dumbfounding that they're here with them. My go-to story for that is that Sega historical figures punch out thing that was just that Carly and I saw a demo of, and it was just awful, just fucking terrible.
Yeah.
And we're just sitting there talking about how bad this demo is, because we're like, I cannot believe how bad. Why is this literally on the end cap of Sega's booth? What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
And apparently the producer was just standing there the whole time we were talking about it like this.
Well, yeah, and that's the whole thing. Like, you talk about it being organic. I mean, things would just happen. You would just be standing there playing a game, and you would look over and you'd be like, there's Miyamoto.
Yeah.
And, oh, there's Reggie. And they would just be standing there. And so it's this weird sort of, like, you feel like it's like you're backstage, like at you're like at the Academy Awards, like you somehow lucked into a ticket to the Academy Awards, and you're sitting here and there's like, oh, well, there's Robert De Niro or something like that. It's just weird. Just very strange. These people that you only see on television, or, you know, it's just very strange. Or in press conferences.
And you might be talking to them. I never did a Vimeo interview, but I've spoken to Reggie multiple times, and it's just like I was holding what was that Pokeball controller for the Pokemon Go.
Let's go Eevee, let's go
Pikachu. Yeah, Pokemon Plus, something like that.
Yeah.
And I remember I was holding it because I demoed it, so the pictures of NWR are my hand. And then I went back up into the booth because I asked nicely, and they're like, yeah, whatever. And he was up there while I was holding it, and like, how do you like that? And I was like, it's really small. And I think I got a joke back about like, well, maybe your hands are just too big. I was like, thanks, buddy.
Yeah.
Because it was really small. It was freakishly small. Like this is.
I mean, I assume it was with kids in mind, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's
always going to be apt.
Yeah, especially because it was one preying on nostalgia for a then 25-year-old game. So.
That's true. But equally, I guess it's like another way to, probably meant to be like, I want to say meant to be, but certainly with the expectation of like a parent who loved the original generation of Pokemon would play it with their kid to introduce it, and it's like, oh look, you're kind of playing the same thing I did all those years ago, So I can understand how it would get there, but equally, imagine, just if not seeming big enough.
Yeah, there was the whole show. It was just like there is a sense of, this is nonsense that I'm experiencing right now, that made the games industry feel incredibly unprofessional.
Yeah.
And now, unfortunately, the games industry still feels unprofessional, but now it's for depressing reasons.
Yeah,
it's for like,
yeah.
It's like what new shit did Ubisoft do to their employees this time?
Yeah.
Who's getting their headcount cut after launching a massively successful game?
Yeah.
Or who acquired a studio for no good reason, realized, oh God, what have we done? And just shut that studio down.
Who's union busting today? Let's see.
Yeah. Who's out union bust? I guess that's professional. Like that's a kind of profession.
Yeah, that is,
But the
unprofessionalism.
The unprofessionalism of E3 was just like, we're going to have Tony Hawk on a half pipe. Why? He's 45 years old. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Or actually, to give it a Tony, we're going to put the Tony Hawk ride board on a platform raised above the ground. Why? People keep falling off of it. Yes. Mm-hmm. And we're going to put it right in front of everybody to see.
Yeah, it was
we're
endearing.
We're going to make a plastic container to play our Kinect game so you don't hit anybody. That's cool. Are we going to ventilate it? No, we're not. And we're going to put a spotlight on top so it's extra hot.
Yeah, we're going to have booth babes everywhere because we just really don't know any better. We're completely not self-aware in the slightest. So we're going to have booth babes everywhere because that's great, right? That's cool. Everybody's cool with that. And then we're going to have these parties where anybody can sneak in, and we're just going to give alcohol to everybody. It's totally cool, right?
We're going to have Yoshinori Ono sitting on a motorcycle in the middle of the aisle waving around the chainsaw from Dead Rising.
Yeah.
For no good reason, but we're going to block traffic right in front of Nintendo's booth, but that definitely won't be an issue.
Yeah.
Like, there was just a sense of everyone's there. Nobody has any idea what the fuck. Like, I've been to other trade shows. They're not like that.
No, they're not.
They're not like a 4-alarm fire at all times.
Well, it goes back to just the fact that I think people, they didn't even know what it was for anymore. This is one of the things that happened with Nintendo, very high profile when you got to the 2008 conference with the stage presentation with Wii Music and all that. The idea of just like, like they're not even talking to the people in the auditorium anymore. They kind of go into the more mainstream media. Would be some of the people in there, but not like the primary contingent there, and more just like trying to communicate to a broader audience. But that was far from the only example. Like you said, all this kind of, celebrity stuff and all that. It's just like, again, the idea
here. Why?
You projecting some of that stuff back to like the mid-90s when the internet was barely a thing, and the idea of like, you're gonna have all these like stunts, or just have Jim Cameron come along and talk some shit about media or whatever. Like,
I wanted to die during that. It was terrible.
They wouldn't have believed that it would go there. So that's the point, I guess, is like it became kind of like, well, what do we think this is about? And or maybe we want to make it about something that it's not. Like, we'll change what it's. And so year to year, people did things. Nintendo definitely, did things differently year to year. It's like, Pac-Man versus went down like a lead balloon. Well, let's have Reggie get up there and say, we're kicking the shit out of people, and here's Link, and he's all pissed off now. And after Wii Music, you had Other M was like in 2009, wasn't it? As a way, so look, no, we are talking. If year to year, people would change tactics, but then of course across the breadth of all the different companies and entities that were there, they all had different tactics. So and
they
sort
weren't
of kaleidoscope of nonsense.
Like, and they didn't coordinate to a degree where it became hard to do your job. I mean, there was the famous, was it EA who told people they weren't allowed in? where like EA and Ubisoft were always back to back at theaters that were like a mile apart from each other. And I think it was EA who one year was like, if you're not in our theater by this time, that time being right before before Ubisoft's ended. Maybe it was the other way around. But essentially, like, you would have to have left the other one. They weren't going to let you in, even though they had hundreds of empty seats because everybody was at the other one and were getting roasted on social media by people who were there going like, boy, I sure am glad they won't let anybody in and the thing hasn't even started yet and there's all these fucking empty seats. It was like, we had to go back to the conference center because like, I guess we're not getting in. Oh well. Like there was a sense of there's no organization. There's no, like, maybe there's an internal plan, like Greg said, but like cross coordination, there was nothing.
No, you always knew there was a shot at you sneaking into something.
Right. Or just like somebody does something and completely disrupts somebody else in like an incredibly infantile and stupid way.
Yep.
I remember hearing complaints from one booth that was next to Activision when they were still there because of the fucking Guitar Hero shit. It was too loud. You couldn't hear anybody talking. I personally can tell you, the year that Square Enix bought Taito, they told Taito not to talk to anybody, but they bought them right before the booth, and Taito had a booth. So if you went to Taito, they said, you have to get Square Enix permission to talk to us. And if you went to the Square Enix booth, no one had told them that. So no one could talk to them all week. It was wild. But you couldn't hear anybody because the displays at Square Enix were turned up so loud that screaming, I couldn't hear myself. It's a great system, and I miss it. I miss it so much. Like to your point, it's probably better for the industry that it is dead. It's certainly better for the participants. But there is a sense of like, well, any dumb shit can happen that we don't get anymore because Summer Games Fest is just this sort of like boring death march of video presentation after video presentation. It's like they took the Nintendo Direct and just made soulless copies.
Yeah,
like
I know.
It's
trying to like to some extent it's trying to capture something that people that like that didn't even exist. I feel like, you know what I mean, like because you know, again, like I mean, when I think of old E3 presentations to some extent, you know, I'm remembering all the times when, you know, Nintendo are going over the graphs and the charts about how many GBAs they sold. You know? And it's just like the idea of that being replicated at, you know, Summer Games Fest. Well, it's never going to happen, is it? But that's the point. It's just like, I think people have forgotten what some of those E3s were actually like, you know, when it was more like, yeah, like we're talking to the retailers in the room. Like, this is how much stuff we've sold in the past year, and this is how much we expect to sell in the next year. Like that was part of it when it was more like an actual trade show. So it's more like trying to trade off this vague notion of what like people thought E3 became or whatever, but it just you can't capture it because it didn't make any sense. I mean, it's amazing it lasted as long as it did. Seemingly to me, just because
I agree.
It became this bizarre kind of chimera a long time before it actually completely ran out of gas.
I mean, towards the end state there, you had people who couldn't afford to be in it, basically just setting up in parking lots across the street trying to hawk whatever shit they had. Be it, what was that console you bought the controller for, John, but never actually bought? The Ouya.
The Ouya, yeah.
Ouya was in the parking lot of the LACC because they didn't want to buy a booth, which is very encouraging for the viability of that platform.
Right.
I remember Devolver couldn't get in, so they just set up like a taco truck across the street and brought in some Airstream trailers. Like there was a sense of like, ESA is not happy we're here because we got paying to be here.
Yeah, sort of. There's like kind of this like guerrilla marketing going on where you could take advantage of the fact that people in E3 were basically a captive audience that were trapped in those buildings for hours on end. Sometimes an entire day with not a whole lot of food, not a whole lot of water, you know, bathrooms that were
the night before.
Yeah, bathrooms that were jam-packed. Everybody was hungover. And so you had these companies that would take advantage of it.
It's like the first time I met both Tyrone of, I'm blanking on the name of the company now, before they became Public Enemy. Nicholas, yeah. And the first time I met Seren, we're both like, I'm going to show you a game. I don't have a booth. Let's just do this on the side somewhere. It's like, okay, I guess, sure.
That was the same but like Housemarque was the same that one year.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Were you with me when I saw Housemarque? They were literally
think so.
Next Machina, that game. I forget who I was with, but they had no booth. And so they set up a desk out in the hallway and they plugged in a PC and they were running a PC build of it, and people were like, nobody was playing it because they thought these guys were scammers or something. Nobody wanted to talk to them. And the game's fantastic. It was so funny. But they're like, we didn't have any money for a booth, and so we just set up here and we're hoping that they don't kick us out. No one said anything so far.
This is amazing. This is amazing.
So good. Like, they're amazing. They're fantastic developers.
They're like, and I think this is more symptomatic of the industry as a whole, as it's grown and become more and more oriented towards these major companies, that you're not going to see that kind of verve, that kind of like, I'm going to do something real stupid. Let's see what I can get away with. But also the forums for it have closed down. Like, you're not going to pull that shit at PAX, because PAX is already about like trying to feature a bunch of indie games. You're not going to do something completely asinine.
But even PAX, I mean, PAX has gotten more corporate as well.
Oh yeah, totally. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, you could go to something like MagFest, which is smaller and more insular, but that's not going to get any coverage. That's the trade-off. So it's weird. Yeah, I don't know. Guillaume, did you have a gaming experience that you miss?
Yeah, I should have come out with that before we started reminiscing about E3.
I'm pulling it back.
But I mean, maybe it's kind of adjacent to E3 because Street Pass games is not really something that you can play today. But I had a really good time, I guess, brushing past other nerds who would Street Pass and like, oh, cool, like, you know, I went to work downtown Montreal and I've got 3 Street Passes. Yes, like what a haul!
Yeah.
Hell yeah!
But yeah, like that.
Some of us never left
the
Street Pass game. Some of us never left.
John's still looking at Street Pass.
I'm still looking at Street Pass people.
Well, I did, I was playing Ridge Racer 3D. I did leave the Street Pass on just in case. Like, I brought the 3DS with me going to see a movie downtown, but sadly,
if you had Street Pass someone who had that as their Street Pass game, that would have been... I would actually be worried for my own safety.
Yeah, just gonna leg it out of the theater at that point.
I'm being stalked. This is
especially
warning.
Since like you can leave someone a message, right? So like if it's something like "I see you" or
what if their username was the new Guillaume? Be like, no, I need to leave.
None enough letters.
The Street Pass is going to be
New
Street Pass is going to be an integral part to that It Follows sequel that is apparently coming.
Guy 2.0. What would you call the sequel to It Follows?
I think it's follows? They Follow. I think that's what I've read.
That sucks. That's no.
No, it's the Aliens sort of school of sequel naming, yeah.
Yeah.
Can be like they're ahead or something, or like you're trying to catch up to them. They're not following anymore.
You
truly terrifying.
The only other one I could think of is there is a the best way of putting it. Like I miss well, no, it's kind of adjacent. I was saying I miss some of the like the weirdness about playing stuff online. Like it's a dumb statement, but there was something about like, is this shit actually going to work? That made it feel a little bit less just, it just is. Like, it's good that this shit just works. It needs to just work. But there was a period of like, man, everything kind of not working has an appeal. Like with the fact if I want to play this game online, a dialer on my computer has to fire up.
Yeah, it felt like an achievement, you know?
Yeah, like I did it. I got it online. I may never get this online again.
Yeah, it's like
it may never succeed.
This Rube Goldberg machine is actually working. It's amazing.
I have a USB stick plugged into my desktop PC, hooked up to my network. That USB stick is connected to my Wii. That Wii is letting me play the Conduit. Well, trying to. I just got kicked out again. It will not let me add John Lindemann as a friend in Smash Brothers. It refuses.
Oh god, that was so weird, wasn't it?
It was! Everybody else! Oh, like to the point where like, does one of us have the code plugged in wrong? No, because everybody else is working.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so fucked up.
I'll miss the Miiverse, honestly. Like it was
That's
super neat to be able to
yeah.
just like draw and like post pictures and just like see whatever like your online friends are posting.
It
there
was
was a
bad.
community there. Yeah,
It was bad, but it was bad in a great way.
Yeah, and again, like connected to that, I miss being able to just like post directly from my consoles on Twitter.
Yeah,
that was neat. Like just being able to upload the pictures and post them because now like that's not a thing anymore. And Nintendo still offers a way to like send your 10 pictures at once to your phone. It sucks. It sucks so much. I do it because like outside of posting what I'm playing, I don't create content on my Blue Sky account. So
but it is a pain
I
in
do
the
it,
butt.
but it sucks. It's a pain
I
in the
figured
ass.
out how to do it on my laptop. It's a little bit easier, but yeah, it still sucks.
Yeah.
It still sucks. It's a bad solution.
So you scan a QR code, you scan another QR code, and then like you manually touch the pictures, like try to send them to your photos on an iPhone. But like for video, sometimes I don't know why, maybe because I don't have Safari as my default browser, but sometimes it just refuses to send the video where it's meant to be, where I'll be able to find it and post it. So
I'm ewing Safari as your default. Yeah, I'm ewing Safari as your default browser, not it not working.
Yeah,
it not working is the expectation for Nintendo. Somebody who uses Safari as your default, I instantly have mistrust.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that'll do it for this email. Let me see. Where are we at time? Oh wow, we spent more time on that than I expected. All right. I don't know that we have time to sort out our favorite console.
Yeah, maybe next week.
Yeah, it's a ranking. If it was just like name your favorite Nintendo system, we could just round robin it, but they want us to rank. So, Pokemon Mini at the top, and then we'll work our way back down from there. All right, so we're gonna actually call it here. We had another email picked out, but we'll get to it. So emails or retroactive suggestions, both work. You can send them to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. That is rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. And with that, it's time for Greg to tell me what music are we doing this week.
Well, also in the few days after this episode is published on the 27th, we've got the annual Pokemon Presents to tie in with Pokemon Day, the anniversary of the launch of Red and Green back on the Game Boy. So kind of had to be Pokemon related, really, and not surprisingly, we've got quite a few sort of requests that could work in that regard. So sort of apologies to anybody that does have a request on the books that's not going to get used here. But, I'm sure there's be further such opportunities with something like Pokemon. But in this case, the one that's a little bit earlier actually came in shortly before Pokemon Day last year from Ravio, for the Ends Castle medley sort of song where I think it debuted in Super Smash Brothers for 3DS, because it was that was the End Castle, like the sort of Pokemon Black and White stage was in the 3DS game, and then you had a different one in the Wii U game. Obviously, it all comes back in Smash Brothers Ultimate today, but as you might imagine. A lot of Pokemon music adapts very well to Smash music, the battle stuff in particular. But this, of course, does kind of trace from Pokemon Black and White. So I guess that's one of the possibilities for Pokemon Presents, is maybe something on another remake. It's been a while since the remake. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl came out at the back end of 21. So I guess that is a possibility. I mean, a certainty for something is going to be Pokemon Legends Z2A. We haven't seen very much of that. So presumably we're going to see more, as it's one of the only things, leaving Xenoblade aside, because that's going to be out so soon. I mean, it's that and Metroid. That's the only two things that we know about, basically, for the entire rest of the year, because of all the shroud of secrecy surrounding Switch 2. So we'll definitely see some of that. And I'm still hoping for Pokemon Pinball on the NSO. Come on. I mean, it isn't too much to ask, and yet it is too much to ask for the mainline games on NSO, probably. I mean, they did get to Virtual Console eventually with like a somewhat increased price, but also increased functionality, because it actually had link cable support. But yeah, just like actually fill out the cool spin-offs would be nice, because you've got to the GBC game and the GBA game.
But I mean, like, asking for a DS game, there are no DS games yet, right, on the service. Like,
no. I'm just thinking about I'm thinking about a remake in the same vein as Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl might be teased for the future, because that's the next. That's the next generation. But Black and White were the next generation after Diamond and Pearl, and one I missed actually. I played Diamond and Pearl, and then I played Soul Silver. And I just kind of had played plenty of Pokemon on DS and kind of skipped that one.
Speaking of PAX, that was the game that we
thing. Weren't you talking about Metroid Pinball? I was talking about Metroid Pinball.
No,
sorry, I was talking about Pokemon Pinball.
He said Pokemon Pinball.
Ah, okay, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. Speaking of Pokemon Black and White, that was the game that we peer pressured John into buying at PAX.
Yes, it's a fact. Yep.
That's how I ended up skipping it. See, I wasn't there. Mm-hmm. I wasn't there to be peer pressured into buying it, so I didn't get to play it.
And speaking of Street Pass, that was in part because I had that weird proto Street Pass in it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, there was a few, wasn't there? There was like Bark Mode and Dragon Quest 9. Yeah. There was a few things on DS that kind of, and they kind of, had that completely kind of system level integrated then for 3DS, which was pretty cool. But yeah, hopefully.
I feel like Square Enix basically invented Street Pass, and then Nintendo was like, that's a good idea. And then I guess Bark Mode was there first, but that was I never actually used Bark Mode on Nintendogs for the record, just to be explicit. I mean, it's kind of baked in there, but for people who weren't around back then, Bark Mode was a thing. If you put if you left the Nintendogs running and put your your DS to sleep, you could do something. I have no idea what it actually was at this point. Right, that's right. Well, presuming like it's gonna bark or something. Nintendo's been pretty good about naming modes for ways that raise more questions than answer. Bark mode, mouthful mode.
Just, if somebody else has got their DS, shut up in sleep mode, and with Nintendogs running, they kind of, they recognized each other and started making a noise. I'm assuming it was something like that, but with DQ9, it was like treasure maps trading or something, right? So I think that was definitely in Japan. Sounds like it was a pretty big deal and would have given it, and it was, the conditions were always better in Japan for this by definition, obviously. But it gave Nintendo the impetus then to put it into 3DS. But hopefully we see some cool stuff out of Pokemon Day this year.
Cool. All right. Well, on that, it's time for us to go. Bye, everybody.
Later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.